Why being boring secretly makes you powerful. We live in a world obsessed with spectacle. Everything is curated, exaggerated, filtered. Social media demands you be interesting constantly. You have to be loud, spontaneous, wild, unpredictable. You have to chase experiences, share photos of your dinner, visit exotic places, and turn every moment into content. The message is clear: if you're boring, you're invisible. If you're routine, you're irrelevant. And yet, if we pause the noise for just a moment, if we step back and examine what actually builds power, influence, longevity, and meaning, we begin to see something strange, something paradoxical. It's not the spectacular that builds strength. It's the boring. It's the quiet repetition, the unsexy discipline, the unshared, unposted, unseen acts done in solitude. The power we admire in others is so often rooted in behaviors we'd scroll past online. Let's begin with the question: what if the very thing you're avoiding, routine, stillness, predictability, is the thing that would make you unstoppable? When I say boring, I don't mean lifeless. I don't mean settling for less. I mean the kind of grounded, focused, disciplined life that isn't addicted to constant stimulation. A life that doesn't need to be seen to feel real. A life that prioritizes depth over novelty. We've been conditioned to believe that excitement equals success. But if you study the most powerful minds in history, philosophers, creators, rulers, you find a different pattern. You find men and women who embraced the mundane, who made peace with repetition, who woke at the same hour, did the same work, followed the same rituals. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and stoic philosopher, wrote daily entries in his journal not for fame, but for himself. He didn't chase adrenaline, he chased alignment. Think about that. The most powerful man in the known world didn't spend his time chasing chaos. He returned to the same thoughts, the same questions, the same principles. That's not boring. That's sovereignty. But it gets deeper, because when we strip away the distractions, the entertainment, the need to be constantly entertained, we're left with ourselves. And most people don't want that. That's why we run from boring. Because boring forces us to confront the parts of ourselves we've buried beneath stimulation. If you sit alone in a room with no phone, no noise, no conversation, what surfaces? That's the test. That's where your real life begins. Not in motion, in stillness. And most can't handle it.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But here's the twist. The people who can, they become dangerous in the most beautiful way, because they're no longer controlled by the external world. They're not chasing dopamine. They're not addicted to novelty. They're building, slowly, steadily, like a glacier moving through a mountain. That's the real secret behind boring people who become powerful. They understand compound results. They understand the value of doing the same thing over and over, not because it's exciting, but because it works. Let me ask you something else. When did you last do something every day for a year, not because it was fun, but because it made you better? That's the kind of question that reveals how deep our addiction to novelty really goes. We want growth, but we don't want repetition. We want mastery, but we don't want boredom. And yet, all mastery is built through boredom. The athlete who trains, the writer who writes, the monk who meditates, the entrepreneur who shows up day after day, regardless of mood or motivation. They don't avoid boredom, they use it. They alchemize it. They understand that boredom is not a problem. It's a portal, a threshold, a test, because what happens on the other side of boredom isn't numbness, it's depth. It's focus. It's spiritual intensity. When you stop needing every moment to entertain you, you begin to reclaim your time, your mind, your energy. You start showing up for your goals, not like an addict chasing a high, but like a craftsman building something eternal. That shift from chasing excitement to cultivating depth is one of the most powerful transformations a human being can make. It's not flashy, it's not viral, but it is undeniable. And here's something no one tells you: boring people are hard to manipulate. Why? Because they don't need your approval. They don't need your reaction. They're not tweaking their personality for attention. They're grounded, predictable, steady. And in a world that's constantly shifting, that kind of internal structure becomes magnetic. People begin to trust you not because you're exciting, but because you're reliable. You keep your word, you show up, you stay calm. You don't burn out every 6 months from chasing extremes. You are a pillar, not a spark, a foundation, not a firework. So let me ask you one last question before we go deeper. What if being boring is actually a spiritual rebellion against everything the modern world is trying to turn you into? What if it's not a flaw, but a superpower? What if, in a culture addicted to stimulation, the ultimate flex is consistency? That's what we're going to explore now. Because the more you understand the hidden power of boring, the more you begin to see that it's not boring at all. It's rare. It's sacred. It's the beginning of something eternal. The discipline paradox. Why boring habits make you mentally invincible. There's a strange paradox at the heart of discipline. From the outside, it looks lifeless, robotic, dull. But internally, for those who live it, discipline becomes the most liberating force imaginable. It's ironic, isn't it? We think freedom means doing whatever we want, whenever we want, but in practice, that leads to chaos, scattered energy, shallow relationships, half-finished dreams. The people who live by that kind of freedom are often the most lost. But the ones who submit to structure, who embrace the routine, who do the same thing every day, those are the ones who become invincible. And here's why: they've mastered themselves. Let's be honest. Most people don't fail because life is unfair. They fail because they can't stay focused. They can't delay gratification. They can't resist distraction. They're not mentally weak, they're just undisciplined. And discipline doesn't come from motivation. It doesn't come from being inspired by a YouTube video or writing goals in a notebook. It comes from boring repetition, from doing the work when no one's watching, from showing up when it's inconvenient, when it's unsexy, when it's the last thing you feel like doing. That's where the real transformation happens, not in the highlight reel, but in the shadows. Think about this. The most powerful people in any field, philosophy, athletics, business, art, they all have one thing in common: extreme consistency. They repeat, they refine, they endure. And the world calls them talented. But talent is just the visible tip of the iceberg. What lies beneath is boring. It's early mornings. It's meditation. It's writing the same sentence 10 times until it's right. It's failure, revision, patience. It's the slow death of the ego and the birth of mastery. That's what boring habits build, not just skill, but mental resilience. Now, ask yourself, how different would your life be if you could trust yourself to do the hard thing every day, whether you felt like it or not? What would change if you kept your promises to yourself, even when no one else knew? That's the power of discipline. It's not just about getting things done. It's about becoming someone you can trust, someone you respect. That's what people don't understand. Discipline isn't a punishment. It's a gift. It's a signal to your own nervous system. I'm not chaotic. I'm not lost. I'm in control. And here's the deeper layer. When you become disciplined, you become mentally dangerous. Because now you can delay gratification longer than most people can stay interested. You can endure discomfort. You can outlast trends, criticism, betrayal. You're not reacting, you're directing. Your mind is no longer a battlefield of conflicting impulses. It's a cathedral of focus. And in today's world, that kind of mind is a rare and potent weapon. Because here's the truth, the world is designed to break your focus. Every app, every ad, every headline is engineered to hijack your attention. You're being trained to crave stimulation, to avoid silence, to fear boredom. But discipline is the antidote. It's the shield. It's the rebellion. Every time you do something difficult and boring on purpose, working out, journaling, practicing, sitting in silence, you're rewiring your brain to resist distraction. You're building mental muscle, and over time, that muscle compounds. Suddenly, what used to be hard becomes easy. What used to be boring becomes sacred. And let's not forget this, discipline simplifies life. When you've decided what matters, and you build your days around it, you don't waste energy on nonsense. You stop overthinking. You stop negotiating with yourself. You just do. And that frees up so much bandwidth. It creates space for insight, creativity, peace. You're no longer caught in the emotional roller coaster of inconsistent action. You're steady, and that steadiness radiates outward. People feel it. They trust it. It becomes your edge. So here's the deeper philosophical question. If your soul is a fire, what kind of fuel are you giving it? Are you burning bright for a moment and then collapsing? Or are you feeding it slow, reliable energy that will carry you through decades? Because that's what discipline does. It turns your soul into a furnace that doesn't flicker in the wind. It makes you mentally invincible, not because you never doubt, but because you act despite the doubt. That's what boring habits create, a mind that cannot be broken. The quiet path to greatness, why boring people become legends. We imagine greatness as something loud, explosive, a dramatic rise to fame, a viral moment, a standing ovation echoing across the world. We think of legends as those who shook the earth with their charisma, who left trails of fireworks behind them. But if we look closely, really look at how greatness is built, we find something far quieter, almost invisible. We find lives that moved in silence. We find people who didn't chase attention, but chased meaning, not the spotlight, but the process. And more often than not, those people were considered boring until history revealed what they had silently become. Think about it. The philosopher who writes alone for decades. The scientist who obsessively tests the same theory. The monk who returns to the same chant every morning. The athlete who trains before the world wakes up. These people don't look exciting. They don't post motivational quotes or talk about hustle culture. But they are the ones who shape the world while the rest of us are distracted by noise. But they are the ones who, by doing the same thing over and over, reach a level of depth the rest of us never touch. And it's in that depth that greatness lives. There's something profoundly spiritual in that, in choosing to live boring on the outside so you can become extraordinary on the inside. Because the truth is, most people are trying to escape themselves. They fill their calendars, their feeds, their minds with constant activity because silence terrifies them. Stillness exposes them. Boredom forces them to reckon with their own emptiness. But the boring person who embraces the quiet, who walks the same path, who doesn't need every day to be a new adventure, that person is building something eternal. They are not escaping themselves. They are becoming themselves. Let me ask you this. Would you be willing to live an invisible life for 10 years if it meant becoming unforgettable for the rest of time? That's the trade boring people understand. They know that greatness isn't found in public moments. It's forged in private ones. It's not found in being seen, but in seeing clearly, consistently, without distraction. They learn how to aim their energy in a single direction and keep going, long after the excitement fades. That's what makes them legends. Not the act itself, but the duration, the depth, the devotion. Most people quit when things get repetitive, but legends begin there. And what's truly fascinating is how the world eventually circles back. The same people who were once dismissed as dull, unremarkable, predictable, those are the ones we quote in books, study in classrooms, name buildings after. Why? Because when everyone else was trying to be impressive, they were trying to be useful. When others wanted to be admired, they wanted to be accurate. And that quiet focus over years, decades, builds something more powerful than charisma ever could. It builds truth. But we have to be honest, this path is lonely. It's not glamorous. You will not always be understood. You might go years without recognition. And that's why so few people ever take it. Because it demands self-trust. It asks you to believe in your vision when no one else does, and to trust the process when there are no visible results. To keep walking the same circle, knowing that every lap is deepening your strength, your insight, your soul. That's the real cost of greatness, the willingness to be boring now so you can be remembered forever. Let me ask you something even deeper. Are you living to impress the present or to shape the future? Are your choices designed for applause or for impact? Because the answers to those questions will reveal whether you're building legacy or just chasing relevance. And legacy doesn't care about trending topics. It doesn't care about attention spans. It cares about substance. And substance is always built slowly, quietly, boringly. That's the paradox. The more you embrace boredom, the more you begin to transcend it. What looked boring from the outside becomes rich from the inside, and the ritual becomes sacred. The repetition becomes art. And eventually you realize being boring wasn't a limitation, it was a discipline, a devotion, a spiritual practice in disguise. And those who master it become the ones the world looks to when the noise finally fades. The final revelation, why boredom is the doorway to transcendence. There comes a moment, if you walk the path of discipline long enough, when something unexpected happens. You begin to feel a shift not in the world around you, but in your perception of it. The routines that once felt dull become meditative. The silence that once felt empty becomes full. But the repetitions that once seemed meaningless now hold depth. And this is where we arrive at the final revelation. Boredom is not the enemy, it is the doorway to transcendence. We spend our lives running from boredom. We treat it as a problem to solve. We reach for our phones, our playlists, our distractions, the moment a second of silence creeps in. But what if boredom isn't a void? What if it's a veil? What if it's not the absence of meaning, but the threshold to it? The truth is, most people never find out because they never stay long enough in boredom to see what's on the other side. They assume there's nothing there. But those who stay, those who endured the silence, they discover something else entirely. They discover being. You see, boredom strips away the performance. It reveals the raw landscape of your inner world. It forces you to sit with your thoughts, your fears, your untended dreams. And most people aren't ready for that confrontation. They avoid it. But if you choose to stay, if you choose not to escape, it begins to transform. Boredom becomes presence. Presence becomes awareness. Awareness becomes awe. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in silence and felt completely alive, not because something exciting was happening, but because you were finally paying attention? That's what boredom, at its deepest level, leads to. It leads to attention. And attention, pure and undiluted, is the foundation of transcendence. The philosopher Simone Weil once said, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." And she was right. Because in a world hijacked by entertainment and distraction, giving your full attention is an act of rebellion. It's also an act of awakening. When you give your attention to one thing fully, repeatedly, patiently, it reveals itself in ways you never imagined. A walk becomes a meditation. A breath becomes a prayer. A sentence becomes a symphony. Boredom is merely the discomfort that comes when your mind is detoxing from overstimulation. It's the withdrawal, the silence after the noise. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first. But beyond that discomfort is a kind of power most people never tap into. And the power to sit still and see. The power to act without needing reaction. And the power to create from alignment, not approval. And here's the final insight. Boredom, when embraced, becomes the gateway to timelessness. When you are no longer rushing from one moment to the next, you become present. And in presence, time disappears. You are no longer calculating, comparing, optimizing. You are being. And in that state, you touch something eternal. You begin to realize that greatness was never about doing more. It was about being more focused, more grounded, more alive. So maybe being boring isn't just powerful, it's sacred. Maybe the most radical act in a hyper-stimulated world is to slow down, to focus, to commit, to repeat. Maybe the highest form of intelligence isn't complexity, it's clarity. And maybe the people we call boring today will be the ones we remember tomorrow, not because they shouted the loudest, but because they built something that lasted. Let me leave you with one final question. What kind of life could you build if you stopped trying to escape boredom and started listening to it instead? That answer might just change everything. Because in the end, the world doesn't need more excitement. It needs more depth, more stillness, more people willing to be boring enough to become eternal.